The morning my boat disappeared, my phone exploded with messages saying HOA Karen was laughing at the marina, waving from my deck like she owned the ocean. I felt that cold, electric calm settle in, the one that comes before everything changes. She thought it was a harmless joyride. She had no idea who I really was or how badly she'd miscalculated. I'd bought that boat after years of service, months away from home, nights spent listening to waves slap steel hulls under foreign stars. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Every bolt, every rope, every scar on its side told a story. The HOA never liked it parked by the private dock, but the permits were solid, the rules clear, and I followed them precisely. That never stopped Karen. Karen was the kind of woman who treated bylaws like weapons. Clipboard, tight smile, voice loud enough to attract an audience. She fined neighbors for wind chimes, threatened liens over trash bins, and once tried to tow a veteran's truck because the flag offended her aesthetic. I stayed quiet. I'd learned patience on rough seas, where reacting too fast could kill you. That morning, I'd been called in early. Coast Guard duty doesn't wait for comfort or convenience. I locked up, double-checked the dock, and left before sunrise. Somewhere between briefing and deployment prep, my phone buzzed again. A photo came through. Karen on my boat. Her friends crowded behind her, drinks raised, life jackets missing. Caption: borrowed it. Relax. Borrowed. My hands tightened. Not from anger, but calculation. I called the marina. The dock master sounded nervous. He said she'd flashed HOA papers, claimed an emergency, insisted she had authority. Then he whispered, "They're heading toward open water." That was when the calm hardened into certainty. I stepped outside, the air sharp with salt and urgency. Beyond the fence, cutters rocked gently, crews moving with purpose. This wasn't about revenge. It was about safety, law, and consequences. My boat wasn't designed for drunk passengers who didn't know currents, weather shifts, or radio protocol. One bad decision out there could cost lives. I reported it. Officially. Calmly. By the book. The officer on the other end paused, then asked for my service number. I gave it. His tone changed instantly. He said, "Stand by." I watched the horizon and smiled once. Karen thought she'd won. The water was about to teach her otherwise. While I waited, memories surfaced of drills where seconds mattered and mistakes multiplied fast. Out on open water, rules weren't suggestions. They were the thin line between a calm return and a mayday call crackling through the radio. Karen didn't know that line existed. She saw water as scenery, not a force that demanded respect. The response came quicker than I expected. Within minutes, 2 Coast Guard boats prepped for departure. No sirens, no drama, just efficient movement. I briefed the officer in charge, describing my vessel, its handling quirks, fuel range, and the fact that the people aboard were untrained, likely intoxicated, and absolutely unauthorized. He nodded, already understanding the gravity. Back at the marina, word spread. Neighbors gathered, phones out, whispering. Someone laughed nervously, assuming this was just another HOA power play gone too far. They didn't realize how fast things could turn dangerous once land disappeared behind you. The dock master kept asking if everything would be okay. I told him the truth. It depends on how smart they get, fast. Out on the water, Karen was enjoying herself. I learned later she'd been blasting music, standing at the helm like a movie star, ignoring basic navigation markers. Her friends cheered every sharp turn, drinks sloshing, sun climbing higher. They crossed into restricted lanes without noticing, cutting close to commercial traffic. Each choice stacked risk on risk. The Coast Guard cutters closed the distance quietly. Radios crackled. Coordinates locked in. I stood on shore, eyes scanning the horizon, heart steady. This wasn't personal anymore. It was procedure. Protocol. Training overriding emotion. Then the call came. Visual contact established. My boat was drifting slightly off course, wake uneven. The officer asked if I wanted to address them directly over the radio. I declined. Let authorities speak. Let consequences arrive cleanly, without anger muddying the facts. Karen didn't notice them at first. She was too busy waving at a passing yacht, pretending ownership like it was a costume she could slip on for the day. When the Coast Guard finally hailed her, the change was immediate. Laughter stopped. Music cut. Confusion spread across the deck. Her voice came through the radio, sharp and indignant. This is private property. We have HOA authorization. The officer responded calmly, asking for registration, licenses, and a reason for operating the vessel. Silence followed. Then excuses. Then panic. I imagined her face then, the first crack in certainty. She'd spent years believing rules bent for her. Out there, under open sky and federal jurisdiction, they didn't bend at all. I exhaled slowly, knowing this was only the beginning. By the time the cutters reached Karen's boat, the situation had escalated. Waves splashed against the hull as her friends scrambled to stabilize themselves, some clutching drinks, others gripping railings like they suddenly realized the water was no longer a playground. Karen's confident smile wavered, replaced by confusion and rising panic. The officer in charge called out over the radio again, calm and firm, "This vessel is being operated without authorization. All passengers must comply immediately. Safety is our priority." Karen stammered, waving her hands as if that would convince someone outside her bubble of control. The words didn't penetrate her ego at first, but the trained eyes around her read fear, and fear is a universal language. I watched from the shoreline, my own emotions steady. Anger had no place here. My goal wasn't humiliation, it was safe resolution. I knew water could turn dangerous in seconds, and for people like Karen, blissfully unaware, even a small wave could have catastrophic consequences. The cutters maneuvered into position, creating a controlled perimeter around the boat. One officer stepped forward with a life ring, another ready with a rope for towing if needed. Karen's friends started noticing the reality of the situation. Open water is unforgiving when untrained. Panic rippled through the deck, voices overlapping, confusion giving way to compliance. Over the radio, Karen tried to negotiate, citing HOA authority, claiming she owned the experience. The officer's response was procedural but uncompromising: "Federal law supersedes private agreements. You are on navigable waters. Compliance is mandatory." The tone was polite but absolute. Karen's smile vanished completely. She hadn't anticipated accountability beyond landlines, neighbors, or bylaws. I could see it: the shift. Years of believing the rules bent for her, the local fear she inspired on land, evaporating like fog on the ocean. For the first time, she was powerless. Her boat, once an extension of control, was now a floating classroom in humility. Meanwhile, her friends held on, realizing their day of fun had turned into a lesson about authority and consequence. Some whispered apologies, some stared in stunned silence. The contrast between her earlier laughter and current panic was stark, almost cinematic, but entirely real. The Coast Guard crew guided the vessel back toward safe waters, avoiding hazards with precision. Each maneuver was a reminder: preparation, skill, and respect matter. The experience Karen sought to trivialize had become intensely real and utterly unavoidable. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and relief. This wasn't about ego, it was about safety, law, and the lesson that some games have real consequences, especially on the water. Karen's mistake had finally met its match. As the boat slowly turned toward safe waters, Karen clutched the railing, her knuckles white, hair plastered by the sea breeze. She tried to regain control, shouting orders to her friends, but the Coast Guard's presence was absolute calm, precise, unyielding. Every attempt to steer herself was gently overridden with trained authority. Her friends, once laughing and carefree, now whispered nervously. One held the empty cooler like a lifeline, another stared at the horizon, gripping the deck. The shift from fun to reality had been instantaneous. The excitement that drove them recklessly across restricted lanes evaporated as soon as they realized the stakes. Panic is contagious, but so is relief when authority steps in. The officer in charge instructed them to secure life jackets and sit down. Karen hesitated, glancing around as if the rules might bend back to her favor. They didn't. She scanned the horizon for escape, only to find the cutters maintaining formation, leaving no room for deviation. Every decision she tried to force was met with structured response, turning confidence into frustration. I observed silently from the shoreline. This was what responsibility looked like. I had spent years training for moments like this, times when human error could cost lives. The sea doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about bylaws or HOA titles. It only responds to knowledge, preparation, and compliance. Karen was learning that lesson too late. On the boat, tension spiked as one friend accidentally tipped a drink, spilling it across the deck. Karen flinched like it was an omen. Officers calmly instructed cleanup and redirected attention to safety procedures. Each instruction was simple, yet the contrast between their composure and Karen's panic amplified the lesson. Experience beats arrogance every time. Minutes stretched. Karen's earlier bravado had completely dissolved. Her body language screamed defeat, her voice wavered. It was fascinating, almost poetic. The woman who spent years imposing control over neighbors was now entirely dependent on external authority for her own safety. The scales had tipped, and she had no leverage left. The cutters guided them closer to the marina. Karen's friends finally began to grasp the seriousness of the situation. Quiet murmurs replaced laughter, glances at the water replaced carefree selfies. Respect for the rules, long ignored, had arrived. I allowed myself a slow exhale. The first phase of resolution was complete. Karen would survive, and that was priority one. But her ego had taken a hit she wouldn't forget. By the time they reached the dock, she would understand fully, actions have consequences, and the water doesn't lie. The boat approached the dock slowly, each wave lapping against the hull, a reminder of the chaos just behind them. Karen's hands shook, trying to steady the helm, while the Coast Guard crew calmly guided her, speaking in clipped, authoritative tones. Every instruction she ignored in the past now carried weight. Her friends were quiet, faces pale, eyes wide. The thrill they sought had vanished, replaced by the sobering reality of federal enforcement. Phones were held loosely, no selfies, no laughter, just stunned acknowledgement of the danger they'd narrowly avoided. One muttered, "I didn't realize," before trailing off. Awareness had finally arrived. Karen opened her mouth, probably to argue, but the officer stopped her with a firm gesture. "All statements will be recorded at the dock. Compliance now ensures your safety. Resistance serves no purpose." She stared, blinking, as if this rule were invisible to everyone else but suddenly applied to her. The dock came into clearer view, ropes and cleats ready for the boat's secure mooring. Karen's earlier confidence was gone, replaced with hesitation. Each movement required direction. The Coast Guard's hands guided the lines, each knot fastened correctly, reminding her silently that expertise cannot be replaced by arrogance. I watched from the shoreline, every second stretching in clarity. This was the moment where lessons are engraved not in humiliation, but in undeniable experience. Karen's sense of invulnerability, honed over years of HOA dominance, had collided with real-world authority. It was a collision she could neither escape nor manipulate. Her friends began murmuring apologies, eyes darting nervously. Karen remained rigid, pride clashing with fear. Finally, She spoke, voice low, almost reverent. I didn't know it could be like this. It wasn't a plea, it was recognition. Recognition that the water was a force beyond her control. The Coast Guard instructed them to disembark one by one. Karen hesitated, then stepped off, scanning the dock as if it were a battlefield. Her friends followed, relieved but visibly shaken. The sun glinted on the water, calm now, but the lesson was seared in memory. I approached as they secured the boat. Not to gloat, not to punish, just to witness accountability in motion. Karen's shoulders were tense, her posture defensive, yet I could see the shift. Humility, perhaps, or the first understanding that authority doesn't bend for ego. The dock master, who had feared the worst, exhaled audibly. The community's whispers faded as order restored itself. Lessons were learned, reputation slightly shaken, but no one was harmed. In moments like this, satisfaction comes quietly, in knowing rules and skill prevailed over recklessness. Karen's friends gathered on the dock, nervously fidgeting as the Coast Guard reviewed documentation and recorded statements. Their laughter had vanished entirely, even casual whispers sounded like confessions. The reality of open water, its danger, and the authority that governed it had replaced the carefree excitement of earlier hours. Each of them now understood, viscerally, that mistakes on the water have consequences. Karen stood slightly apart, arms crossed, jaw tight. The facade of control she wore like armor on land had failed spectacularly. For once, rules applied evenly, and she couldn't manipulate, argue, or charm her way out. The humbling experience had stripped her confidence bare, revealing vulnerability she rarely acknowledged. The officer in charge approached, speaking calmly but firmly. You operated the vessel without authorization and endangered passengers. All parties must understand that safety regulations exist for a reason. Karen opened her mouth, likely to protest, but the weight of authority silenced her. Her ego, once unshakable, had met an immovable wall. Her friends exchanged guilty glances, whispering apologies for following her lead. I didn't know it was that serious, one murmured, and Karen's eyes flicked to them. Annoyance and shame mingled in equal measure. This wasn't just about her anymore, the ripple effect of her decisions had impacted everyone on board. I watched quietly, arms crossed, the calm after the storm settling in. Satisfaction didn't require shouting. Observing the unfolding accountability, the realization of limits, and the sudden awareness of rules that must be respected, brought a quiet sense of closure. The water doesn't negotiate, and neither should you. Karen was learning that lesson, painfully but permanently. The boat, now tied securely, rocked gently as the tide shifted. Safety checks completed, the Coast Guard prepared to depart. Karen remained behind, hands fidgeting, eyes scanning the vessel as if trying to reclaim some phantom control. Each moment reinforced the fact that authority had prevailed, and mistakes were neither invisible nor forgivable without recognition. The dock master, relieved but tense, whispered that he'd never seen anyone challenge the rules so blatantly and survive without serious injury. Karen's friends nodded, solemn. The day had begun as thrill-seeking fun but ended as an education in humility and respect for forces greater than themselves. I finally stepped forward, breaking the silence. You're lucky no one got hurt, I said. My tone wasn't angry, just factual. Karen flinched, taking in my presence and the quiet reminder that I was the owner of the boat, a Coast Guard officer, and fully aware of her reckless behavior. She looked down, shoulders slumping slightly. The first cracks in her armor appeared, though stubbornness remained. Her friends avoided eye contact, shame written clearly across their faces. The lesson wasn't over, but the first chapter of accountability had concluded on the dock, firmly and undeniably. Karen finally spoke, her voice low, strained, almost unrecognizable compared to the confident tone she had wielded on land. I didn't think it was that serious, she muttered, eyes flicking between the Coast Guard officers and her shaken friends. Her words hung in the salty air, revealing more than apology and unfamiliar recognition of limits. The officer in charge didn't respond with anger. Calm, methodical, and precise, he outlined the consequences: fines for unauthorized vessel use, mandatory safety courses, and documentation to be submitted before any future watercraft operation. Karen's eyes widened slightly, her habitual defenses faltering. The rules were real, enforceable, and absolute: no HOA loopholes, no clever persuasion could override them. Her friends shifted uneasily, suddenly aware of their complicity. Each of them had cheered, laughed, and encouraged the reckless Joyride. The exhilaration of the morning was gone, replaced by the weight of responsibility. One whispered, "We should have stopped her," and Karen's glare softened momentarily, revealing a flash of guilt she rarely allowed herself to feel. I observed silently, arms crossed, noting every gesture and reaction. This was the moment when authority and experience intersected with arrogance and ignorance. The lesson wasn't merely legal, it was existential: understanding that the water is unforgiving, and recklessness, however innocent it seems, carries consequences. The dockmaster, who had watched the entire ordeal, quietly assisted with documentation, shaking his head in disbelief. Karen's past behavior on land: clipboards, citations, fines had created a reputation for dominance, but none of that mattered here. The sea, combined with federal enforcement, had rendered her powerless, and she knew it. I approached, keeping my tone neutral but firm. "The water doesn't care about HOA rules," I said. Karen swallowed hard, nodding slightly. For someone accustomed to control and authority, this was unfamiliar territory, an encounter with genuine power she could neither evade nor manipulate. Humility, rare and uncomfortable, began to surface. As the Coast Guard prepared to leave, Karen's friends quietly helped secure the vessel, following instructions without argument. Her earlier bravado had vanished entirely, the laughter and carefree gestures replaced with deliberate, cautious movements. She realized fully that one moment of impulsive fun could have ended in disaster. I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing the lesson had landed. This wasn't vengeance. It wasn't spectacle. It was accountability enforced with professionalism, precision, and restraint. Karen's arrogance had met experience, and the outcome was instructive, undeniable, and permanent. The tide shifted gently, rocking the boat as if signaling closure. Karen's expression, a mix of shock, shame, and reluctant respect, said it all: the day had rewritten her understanding of authority, risk, and consequence. With the boat finally secured and the Coast Guard preparing to depart, Karen's demeanor had shifted dramatically. Her arms, once crossed in defiance, now hung limply by her sides. She avoided eye contact, occasionally glancing at the vessel as if expecting it to retaliate. Her friends mirrored her unease, realizing the seriousness of their morning escapade. The officer walked them through final safety checks, reviewing logs, life jackets, and proper docking procedures. Every instruction was followed meticulously, a stark contrast to the chaos earlier. Karen muttered compliance, her voice low, betraying the internal acknowledgement that she had underestimated both the rules and the consequences. Each step emphasized the magnitude of her recklessness. I stayed nearby, observing. This was more than enforcement, it was education. Karen's power games on land, her HOA dominance, and habitual manipulation meant little in the face of unyielding regulations and trained authority. Here, knowledge, preparation, and respect for safety dictated outcomes. Arrogance had met expertise, and the lesson was unavoidable. Her friends began speaking quietly, offering tentative apologies for going along with her reckless plan. Karen, for once, didn't interrupt, didn't justify herself. She listened, the defensive walls she carried for years crumbling under the weight of accountability. The moment was uncomfortable, humbling, and undeniably transformative. The dockmaster, who had witnessed every moment, quietly shook his head. "I've seen plenty of people push boundaries," he murmured, "but this was next level." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, she couldn't argue, couldn't manipulate, and couldn't evade responsibility. Everything she thought she knew about control had failed. I finally approached her, calm but unwavering. "Your actions could have endangered everyone on board," I said. Karen swallowed, nodding slightly, her ego bruised but awareness growing. The reality was inescapable. Joyrides and shortcuts on the water are never consequences-free, no matter how confident one feels. As the sun reflected off the gentle waves, I noticed a subtle shift. Karen's posture softened, tension easing slightly. Her friends remained cautious but cooperative. The lesson had landed not through confrontation or humiliation, but through experience, authority, and the undeniable logic of safety protocols. The Coast Guard prepared to leave, giving final instructions and reminders about maritime rules. Karen's boat, once a symbol of carefree entitlement, now represented accountability. Every line, every procedure, every careful maneuver reinforced that day's lesson: arrogance may survive on land, but on water, respect and knowledge reign supreme. I exhaled, knowing the situation had reached resolution. Karen had faced consequences, learned boundaries, and her friends had witnessed firsthand the importance of safety. The morning's chaos had transformed into a story they would all remember and perhaps rethink before ever repeating such recklessness. As the Coast Guard finally prepared to depart, the morning's tension had transformed into a quiet, reflective calm. Karen stood by the dock, her usual swagger replaced with humility. Her friends lingered nearby, glancing nervously at her, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. The experience had humbled everyone aboard. The officer in charge reviewed the final paperwork one last time, emphasizing the importance of following maritime regulations. "This isn't just about enforcement," he said, "it's about safety. The water doesn't negotiate. It doesn't forgive mistakes." Karen's gaze dropped to the deck, absorbing the weight of that statement. No excuses, no appeals, just reality. I stepped forward, my presence a reminder of ownership and authority. "You were lucky today," I said evenly. "Luck isn't reliable. Knowledge and respect are." Karen nodded subtly, a mixture of shame and understanding crossing her features. This wasn't punishment, it was accountability, and it had landed perfectly. Her friends quietly helped stow the vessel, following every instruction. The laughter, music, and reckless energy from earlier were replaced by deliberate, careful movements. Each of them had absorbed the harsh truth: actions on the water have immediate, unavoidable consequences. Fun without responsibility can quickly turn dangerous. Karen finally spoke, voice low and hesitant. I understand now," she admitted. There was no justification, no deflection. For someone used to commanding respect and bending rules, this admission was monumental. I could see that her arrogance had been tempered by reality. The water had taught her a lesson she wouldn't forget. The dockmaster exhaled with relief, the community watching silently. Word would spread, yes, but not as gossip. This was a cautionary tale. Karen had been stripped of certainty, forced to recognize limits, and reminded that authority, knowledge, and skill matter more than titles or dominance on land. As the cutters pulled away, I looked back at the dock. Karen's friends were sober, attentive, and quietly apologetic. Karen herself lingered, staring at the water as if seeing it for the first time, not as a playground, but as a force demanding respect. Her posture had softened, shoulders relaxed slightly, humility replacing the habitual superiority she carried for years. I knew this day would be remembered vividly. Not for anger or revenge, but as a clear demonstration of consequence meeting recklessness. Karen had experienced a reality she couldn't control, couldn't manipulate, and couldn't escape. The lesson was permanent. The water had spoken. As the sun reflected off the calm sea, I felt quiet satisfaction. Safety had prevailed, lessons were learned, and accountability had been enforced without drama. Karen had been challenged, humbled, and reminded that the ocean and life doesn't forgive mistakes lightly.